Hey, welcome back to another episode of Fight, Outnumbered, and Win. I am Colonel Broyles. I'm joined by the mighty Ken Fifley. We've worked together a long time. What I want to talk about here is when our Fight, Outnumbered, and Win, this is where we're going to get into mismatches. Now, in 1943, one of the greatest battles of all time, and arguably the turning point of World War II, the Russian army beat the German Wehrmacht at probably considered the greatest tank battle of all time. And more importantly, the Russians had finally figured out how to beat the Blitzkrieg. And they did it through what they call a kill sack. So the Germans, what they would typically do is they use a thing called reconnaissance pull. They would move their reconnaissance out forward and they would find where the Russians' defenses were, where their opponents' defenses. Once they located them, they would radio to the other elements and they would bypass the defenses and they would get into the rear area, attacking the enemy's artillery, headquarters, and logistics. And that would always create shock, and thus the army would have a downfall. That is Blitzkrieg in a nutshell. What the Russians finally figured out is the Germans would always do that. So the Russians, knowing that the Germans were attacking, created a gap that they knew, and knew that the Germans would find this gap and come through. And then they set up, in depth, a trap that they called a kill sack. And from there, after the Germans had thought they were getting into the Russian rear area, what they really had done is found themselves into a trap. And that's what a kill sack is. So what had happened there, the Russians had created a mismatch. They had found a way in the physical sphere of war to overcome the Germans' ability to move fast, strike hard, but they would typically at the cost of their ability to protect themselves. And that's what that was. So in this video, what I want to do is talk more about the physical sphere of war. In the previous video, Ken, I introduced the mental sphere and the moral sphere and the physical sphere. My contention is that almost everybody just focuses entirely on the physical sphere. And you'll see it in all the videos, right? How many planes you have, how many soldiers you have, but that's only 1/3 of warfare. So in the previous video, I talked about the mental sphere. That's when you think about fighting. It's contained of the mental. You usually have your aim, why are you going to go to war? Your imagination, how it will turn out, and then your will to make it happen. The mismatch is you defeat that by the enemy. You want to create hopelessness. So if you missed that, please go back to that video and watch it. But if not, we'll carry on. The moral sphere, this is where warfare becomes different than training. This is the realm of danger. When danger occurs, the moral sphere or human instinct takes over. Typically, you have three. There's the fear of self-preservation, the instinct of self-preservation, the instinct of assertion when you overcome, like courage, and then the instinct of self-sacrifice, much like a woman will protect her child when they feel in danger. How do you beat, all right, you attack the moral sphere, is you demoralize them. You attack their unity, their confidence, and their oaths. So that's in video 2 to go back. Now we're talking about the physical sphere. Now in the physical sphere, it's usually made up of 3 functions. Anytime you're doing it in the army, in the actual physical realm or sphere, you have to move, you have to strike, and you have to protect. Simple is the same with a boxer. If we were boxing, every boxer is going to put up his hands, protect themselves. Well, I can just protect myself at all, that's it. And then I have to move, right? But at some point I've got to strike. Now, every time I do something, I'm giving something up though. For example, if I stay right here, yeah, I might be protected some, but you're still going to land barrages of punches on me. But once I throw a punch, yes, I'm landing some, but what did I just lose?
Open up your ribs.
I open up my protection. So everything comes at a cost of something else. So that's overall, when you think about a mismatch, you got to think about every function of military is about move, striking, and protecting. Move, strike, and protect. All right, but we're talking about a mismatch. So how do you create a mismatch to defeat your opponent in the physical sphere, other than attrition warfare where you just try to have more soldiers and all that? Because remember, we're always focusing on fighting, outnumbered, and win. So mismatch. So the first mismatch you can do is this principle called asymmetry. Now, Ken, I don't know when you went to IOBC, at least when I did, the kind of the big message was always infantry kills infantry.
Sir.
Did you hear that?
Yes, sir.
Tanks kill tanks. And artillery, what are they always worried about?
Counter battery.
Counter battery. So nobody shoots anymore because of counter battery. So in this, that is fighting symmetrical. So when infantry fights infantry, tanks fight tanks, artillery fights artillery, jets fight jets, that is symmetrical fighting. That's not a mismatch. So when you fight asymmetrically, that means what best kills tanks?
Infantry.
Infantry does. Dismounted infantry with their javelins at distance best kill tanks. What best kills artillery? What the Germans learned, tanks do. In fact, the tanks would bypass the infantry, bypass and get right to where the enemy was most vulnerable and kill the artillery with tanks. What best kills infantry?
Artillery.
Artillery does. In World War I, 70% of all the casualties was through artillery. Right now in Ukraine, it's the same way. So artillery kills infantry. When you understand that and you pit those forces like that, you're creating a mismatch. So that's the first mismatch, is what we call asymmetry. So avoid like-on-like fighting. The next is what I call the Alkeyoneus principle. So probably, if you're kind of lost on your Greek mythology, Alkeyoneus was a giant, and he was part of the giants that Hercules had to defeat. Alkeyoneus lived in Thrace. So Hercules, in his way to defeat this giant, he did not know Alkeyoneus was immortal as long as he lived in Thrace. So in the first encounter, Alkeyoneus shot an arrow at him. Hercules shot an arrow at Alkeyoneus. It hit him. Alkeyoneus fell down, but the ground resurrected him, and he came back to life. Hercules was stumped on how to beat him, and Athena gave him the secret that as long as Alkeyoneus was on his home turf, he was immortal. What he had to do is pull him out and fight Alkeyoneus out of his country. So the next time Hercules goes, this time he clubs the giant over the head, stuns him. Hercules picks him up, carries him out of Thrace, and then Alkeyoneus becomes mortal, and he cuts off the giant and thus defeat him. So what does that mean? The mismatch is you don't fight the giant in their home country. So tanks, where do tanks like to fight?
Like wide open area so they can maneuver because they have that extra protection. They're not as vulnerable in those wide open spaces.
They can see far and all that. So for an infantry SBCT to fight tanks in tank country, we're violating the Alkeyoneus principle. Yeah. So we need to pull the giant and get the giant out of their home country. So you fight tanks in infantry country. What is infantry country?
Dense trees, urban environments, mountainous, places that tanks can't really go.
Exactly. So when you fight the giant, you pull them out into our country. So think about that. So as you're planning an operation, you should look, and what I do is I mark on the map, where is tank country? And I'll draw that out. That's tank country. And then I look where infantry country, and I try to create the mismatch where I'm going to fight the giant in infantry country. So that is the Alkeyoneus principle. The last principle I want to introduce is what I call, or we call, the contractor principle. It comes from the idea that we're pretty much all familiar with, is with contractors you can either have something fast and cheap or good. So fast, cheap, and good. How's that go?
Yeah, you can have it fast and cheap, or you can have it good and cheap, but it's never going to be all three at the same time.
Right. So in the same thing with move, strike, and protect. With move, strike, and protect, you can combine two, but it'll be at the cost of one. So let me give you an example. So easiest way to first thing is, let me show you my little diagram right here. So this is kind of back in 18th century type fighting, back in the days of the redcoats and the French and all that. So this what I'm showing here is a column formation. Why do soldiers get themselves in a column formation?
So they can move from point A to point B rapidly.
Fast,
and
right?
orderly.
And orderly. It's easiest. You get everyone ducks in a row and go. You can go fast. But what are you giving up? Well, yeah, you can fight from it, but it's not optimal.
Right.
Can you protect yourself? Yeah, but it's not optimal. Yeah, you kind of do it. So you're giving up two. That makes sense?
Sorry.
So that's why we have a column. So but a lot of times I've heard people say, well, speed becomes my security. If I get in a column and I go so fast, well, maybe now I'm protected just by my speed, so on and so forth. But the point is, when you do one of these, you give up something, right? Yeah. Then here you'd see then there you have the square formation. This was used, like as you said, in Waterloo.
Yeah.
Formations would do this for maximum protection. They'd be surrounded by cavalry and all that. So you have maximum protection. You don't strike as well out of this because you're not massing fires in any direction. You've kind of distributed all your fires in any direction. Can you strike? Sure,
Yeah.
but not as well.
Right.
Can you move in this formation? Very slowly.
Very.
I mean, very. In fact, if you move, that's when you kind of become vulnerable. So, but it's really good for protection. Then you have the online formation. When do you use the online formation?
You're attacking essentially.
Yeah,
and
because you can
everybody's
really
guns are
push
facing the same direction.
Exactly. You can put all your firepower in one direction. So you strike very well. Mm-hmm. Now, can you protect yourself? Only from one direction.
Only from one direction.
If someone comes at you from the flank, in fact, remember, if there's a machine gun right here, they call that enfilade fire.
Sure.
And you can move somewhat, but it's easy to get disjointed and lost.
Mm-hmm.
So everything has the cost of something else. So why I'm showing you that is because you got to remember, when someone's moving fast, you realize what they've given up. When someone gets into a really protective state, what have they given up? Think of a patrol base. When you get into the old Ranger School patrol base, same thing. You might be able to protect yourself, but you're not going to be able to strike well, you're not going to move well. And then online, when you get online, when you're assault an objective, what have you given up? Well, you're going to be able to assault across the objective well. But remember, your flank security is very poor, and then your movement's going to be disjointed. Okay, now move on, but let's take this contractor principle kind of to the black belt level, and this is what I want you to focus on. Armies have tried to combine two, and you'll see that's what Blitzkrieg came from, the interchangeable principle and dislocation principle. They'll combine two, but it's always at the cost of one. And here is what I want you to understand. When you fight a mismatch, all of these theories work, but there'll be a cost of one. So let me explain. So armies will combine the move and strike, but the cost will be the protection will be low. And I call this the Coyote. So I grew up on a ranch, and we had lots of chickens. And in the middle of the night, really fast, the coyotes would come in and just kill all the chickens, and they'd be dead before you knew it, or sheep. The coyote will come in and they move fast, and they strike hard, and then they're all dead. So this is equivalent to the Blitzkrieg. The Blitzkrieg is very much like that. It was all about bypassing the strong point, getting through the fence, bypassing the rancher's corral, and getting into the critical vulnerability. They'd bypass it. But what is the cost of? Their protection's poor because they're going so fast. So what makes the Coyote vulnerable? Well, they run out of endurance, like the Blitzkrieg, and they're susceptible to traps. And that's how we ended up catching coyotes. We would set the traps for them because they come fast, and you set the trap and bait them, and we'd get them that way. A good military example, again, as I talked about the Battle of Kursk, is a really good example of how you trap those who move fast and strike hard. So lure and trap. So think about the coyote, strike hard, move fast, but they'll give up something in their protection. The next one is what about when they then change, to decide to strike and protect. So something like that, they barrel themselves in deep, and then they try to use long-range fires and hit you from afar. We call that the interchangeability principle. I'm going to interchange, and I'm going to not move so much, but I'm going to focus on long-range fires and really protect myself. Good way to think about it is the crocodile. So a crocodile gets in the water, stays low, has all that really thick scales, and I don't know if you call it a hide. I don't know what it's called. And then when something comes, they strike out and they grab it. Very hard to defeat when it's in their river, in their environment. But what they're lacking, remember, at the cost of their movement. So as long as when they decide to move, they become vulnerable. You see them, you can move. So how do you go about it? How do you go about it? Well, you beat the interchangeability again by Blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg was all about that, bypassing, because if you can't move, the way to beat it is to move. And you would bypass and get into their critical vulnerabilities, meaning you would bypass their strengths and get to their artillery, their logistics, and headquarters. Can you think about how would you beat a crocodile? Is you would go find its nest and destroy its eggs. And the crocodile that's their critical vulnerability. The last one is, how about the protect and move? So we're going to combine protect and move. This is really the bread and butter of what strikers do. because we will try to get into a position, set up our dismount squads, and pull the enemy to us where we can destroy them. Think of it, a very good example is the Porcupine. We will do this, but the cost is our offensive ability to go out and strike. So much like a porcupine will move, and then the animals come to them and get their face full of quills. It's kind of so this is also called the principle of dislocation. That's when you bypass, you get behind somebody and force them to turn out and come at you. A good historical example of that is the Battle of Inchon. So if you remember in the Battle of Inchon in 1950, MacArthur does probably one of the greatest U.S. military moves. The North Koreans, this is the Korean Peninsula, is basically have the U.S. Army pinned in the Pusan perimeter, and the North Koreans really are in this position. And MacArthur lands at Inchon, and because here at Seoul, and it turns out all the North Koreans. One of our coolest U.S. military moments. That is being dislocated. Well, how do you counter someone who does that? We would call it the fisher. Basically, how they beat a porcupine, the fisher will grab the porcupine by its nose, flip it over, and attack its soft underbelly. A good historical example of this is, again, one of my favorite battles of all time is the Siege of Malta in 1565, when 6,000 defenders beat 40,000 Ottoman Empire. How they finally beat them was, as the Ottoman Empire was attacking their castle, the Knight's Castle, one 200-man cavalry unit of their own accord left and went and attacked the Ottomans' hospital camp and all of their logistics hubs. And at that moment, the Ottoman believed that their night reinforcements had arrived. They stopped their attack. They went back and saw all of their hospital destroyed, all of their food destroyed, and that was it. They flipped the porcupine over and attacked their soft underbelly. A small force of just a few 200 people, by doing that, defeated over 40,000 attackers. What you need to understand with the mismatches, is each one has their place. But if you're facing someone who's moving fast and striking hard, remember how you beat the coyote. You set the trap. If you have somebody who's sitting back, protecting and striking from afar, how do you beat it? You move. You try to make their position, bypass it, and get to the crocodile's eggs. If you have someone who's trying to dislocate you, getting in behind you, moving into a position where they're protecting themselves and turning you out, how do you do it? You have to figure out how to flip them over and attack their soft underbelly, much like they did at the Siege of Malta. So, fighting outnumber win in the physical sphere of war. With all this, we're creating mismatches. So remember, in the physical sphere of war, how to fight outnumbered and win. Remember the asymmetry principle. Fight unlike. Tanks kill artillery. Infantry kills tanks. And artillery kills infantry. Remember the Alkeyoneus principle. Fight the giant, take the giant out of his home country, pull the giant into your country and slay him there. And the Contractor principle. Remember, Coyote, Crocodile, and Porcupine. So with that, thanks for watching. Fight outnumbered and win.